Okay, so this is the beginning of chapter 24. This has got 3 parts, so there'll be 3 parts to the video or the recordings. Water or fluid, water or fluid, sorry, electrolyte and pH balance. We've talked about water, we've talked about electrolytes, and then we defined pH. And so we're going to cover it a bit more in depth at this point. One thing I forgot to do or cover in the micturition reflex. The Valsalva reflex is a way to increase pressure in the abdomen to push more urine out. So the Valsalva reflex is a contraction of your abdominal muscles, so the internal and external obliques and the transverse abdominis, so that it pushes more urine out at a time. Okay, so the first part is fluid or water balance, and that's his first picture. The middle picture is 2 of the electrolytes in the body, ions. And then you have the pH scale. And so it shows you 1 carbonic acid versus 20 bicarbonate ions. And this is for the blood pH only. It's not for the pH throughout the body, just in the blood. All right, so water. We need to identify the locations or compartments for water. And when we do all these lists, we're always going to go from the largest to the smallest. So one compartment is within the cells, and that's called intracellular fluid. So that's going to be inside cells. So the cell cytoplasm, intracellular fluid. So that's where most of the fluid in the body is. 25% is interstitial fluid, and that's within tissues. So it's outside, so it's called extracellular fluid. It's one of the kinds of extracellular fluid. A specific type of interstitial fluid with its own compartments would be the blood plasma and lymph. And that's 8% of the fluid in the body. So yes, they're a type of interstitial fluid, but they're a specific type of interstitial fluid. 2%, the smallest category, is transcellular fluid. This is fluid that is pulled out of blood and used for a specific purpose and put back into blood. So it's recycled or recycling. It's cycled outside of the other compartments. So examples would include serous fluid or synovial fluid, in our joints. Serous fluid, like in the pericardial, pleural, and peritoneal cavities. Vitreous and aqueous humor, and those are part of the eye. The aqueous humor is the thinner, runnier fluid, and it's part of the anterior chamber, fills in that. And the vitreous humor is a thicker jelly-like solution that fills in the major components of the eyeball itself. and then cerebrospinal fluid. Of these, cerebrospinal fluid probably is the quickest that is cycled. The least, or the shortest, or sorry, the longest one to be cycled in and out is the vitreous humor. And that takes a long time. And that's why they can examine fluid in the eye to find out long-term exposure, long-term problems. So intracellular fluid, interstitial fluid, blood, plasma, and lymph, and transcellular fluid. Those are the compartments that we think of fluid being in. Adding, subtracting, moving. You have two ways to move fluids, and I wish they didn't use two shades of blue, but I guess we'll get over it. The hydrostatic pressure of moving water is what's going to push water from the digestive tract into the bloodstream. So the dark blue. From the bloodstream into the interstitial spaces. You have a weak hydrostatic pressure or filtration that is moving fluid in the lymph system. But that's going to be weaker than the typical. So no energy exerted by moving those fluids. Osmosis is the pale blue. Osmosis moves fluid from the tissues back into the bloodstream or the tissues into the lymphatic vessels, which we've already talked about both of those, and then into and out of cells. So between the interstitial space and intracellular. Again, no energy exerted. And again, filtration opposes osmosis, which is what we see here. Okay. Input or intake versus output. Now, your book has a bar graph, but it's making an assumption of certain volumes. So I converted them to percentages, which make more sense. Again, largest to smallest. Most of the body or most of the water that comes into the body or is added to the body comes from outside the body. So we call them exogenous sources. 64% of our liquids come from the foods or the liquids that we drink. 28% come from the foods that we eat. Okay, so the rest of the fluid is going to come from within the body, from endogenous sources. 8% comes from metabolic reactions, namely things like, cellular respiration, that was one place we talked about that, how it generates molecules of water. Other metabolic reactions would be things like dehydration. Oops. Should be an A. dehydration synthesis. So when we make new organic compounds, we remove what amounts to be a water, and so that's going to generate water. And you have lots of those going on too in the body. So, sources or input of water. Most of it comes from the liquids we drink, then the foods that we eat, and lastly, metabolic reactions. Other organisms can have different percentages. One example would be rats and other rodents. The rats don't typically drink. They get most of their water from the foods that they eat. And so this percentage would be much higher, and this would be much lower if existed at all. And that's why they have a very small urinary bladder. They have very foul smelling, potent, thick urine. So different organisms can have different sources, but this is how it works for us. Okay. Output or loss. Here, you not only need to get the percentages and the ranking correct, but you also need to know how it's lost. So there's a process and there's a form that the water takes. Okay, again, we're going to convert it to percentages. Okay, 60% is lost in the form of urine. And so the excretory organ is the kidneys, because that is where urine is formed. The kidneys. That's where it's formed. 16% is lost through cutaneous transpiration. And this is through the layers of the skin. This is why we have sebum and keratin in the skin. 12% is lost through expired air. So breathing out. So the excretory organ is the lungs. 8% is lost in the form of feces. So that would be the colon. It's responsible for most of the reabsorption or the absorption of water. 4% is lost in the form of sweat, and that would be those merocrine glands that we defined and labeled in the integumentary system. Cutaneous transpiration is lost through the layers, the epidermis, dermis, hypodermis. Okay, so not the same thing as sweat. Now, that's the typical distribution. Now, loss can vary greatly with temperature. If you are hot, you're going to sweat more. You're also going to expire more air because your respiratory rate's going to increase. And so if those two go up, then urine formation has to come down. Humidity can alter these. Humidity refers to the percentage of water in the air. So if you have high humidity, you have lots of water in the air. So you're going to have less loss through expired air and less loss through cutaneous transpiration. So that would mean you'd have to get rid of more in urine. Exercise. If you exercise, You're generating more endogenous water. You're also going to sweat more. You're going to breathe more. And you're going to lose it through cutaneous transpiration because you're hot. So that again means that we're going to have to decrease the urine quantity. So those are three things that are going to greatly affect and can alter those percentages. Okay, regulating fluids. If you have a loss of less than 1%, this is going to increase the blood osmolarity, meaning the concentration of blood. This is going to be detected by the hypothalamus in the brain because there are osmoreceptors. The hypothalamus is going to secrete a releasing hormone to tell the posterior pituitary to secrete the antidiuretic hormone. That's going to trigger the distal convoluted tubules and collecting ducts to increase tubular reabsorption and retaining of water. So it's going to lower the urine volume. Now, why is less than 1% going to be the trigger? We'll see in the next slide. And this used to be called the primary mechanism for regulating fluid levels. If you don't have a drop in fluid levels, then you're going to continue to make urine. If this doesn't work and you have a loss of more than 1% of fluid, again, it's going to do the same thing to the blood osmolarity. It's going to increase it even more. This time, the hypothalamus is going to emit feelings of thirst to trigger drinking of water. So, the loss of more than 1% means that you're dehydrated. So, what happens? Depends on how much water you drink. If you drink water in a small amount, it's going to temporarily inhibit your thirst response. Drinking large amounts of fluid means you're going to quench your thirst, inhibit that thirst response, and you're going to return your fluid levels back to normal. So by the time you're thirsty, you're dehydrated. Now, if you ignore your thirst response, because we all do it, we shouldn't, but we do, then the backup from the hypothalamus is to emit feelings of, where are we at? Hunger, because that's your second largest source of fluid, which is food. So yes, sometimes when you feel hungry, you're actually thirsty and dehydrated. Okay. The hormone levels that affect fluid levels, the hormones, sorry, that affect fluid level. Antidiuretic hormone comes out of the posterior pituitary gland. Aldosterone comes out of the adrenal cortex, and angiotensin 2 comes from the liver, renin, and ACE from the lungs. So if they start with an A, they're going to add water to the body. natriuretic peptides coming out of the atria of the heart, that's going to lower fluid levels. So it's going to decrease or subtract, make us get rid of fluid. Okay, so one other thing, if you compare your blood volume, which is over here, to your fluid intake, which is down here, you have to consume somewhere between 1.5 and 3 liters of fluid a day to maintain your normal blood volume. Otherwise, it's going to drop. Now, red, consumption of not enough fluid, being dehydrated all the time, is going to cause a drop in blood volume, a drop in blood pressure. However, if we get into the yellow and we consume excessive amounts of fluid, the kidneys can compensate very well, but you can't make something out of nothing. So yes, you can compensate, you'll get rid of, but yes, there is a excessive amount of consumption of water. And yes, you can become intoxicated by consuming too much water. So if you chug a gallon of water for no reason, then that's probably not going to be good for you. Now, if you've been out in the fields working or out in doing physical activity, running, whatever, then that gallon may be what you need to replace. But if you're just sitting there doing nothing, and so yes, there were some lovely idiots in colleges across the world that do hazing, and here, yeah, that can be a problem by over consuming water, just like over consuming alcohol. Okay, that's the end of part A for chapter 24. Oops.